Good day. This is Robert Paull. My topic today is actually dragon fruit, and I hope you can bear with me as we move through. Dragon fruit is being widely grown now in Southeast Asia, and I have the pleasure to serve on a committee which is based in Taiwan and Vietnam on dragon fruit production related to production, marketing, and quality. And so that's what I want to talk about today. Vietnam is probably the major producer, with the People's Republic of China showing considerable increase in acreage, particularly in the southern provinces around Fujian, Guangzhou, Hainan, and Guangxi. Guangxi is showing the largest expansion. Indonesia also has a small industry which is increasing, as it is in Malaysia. There are two types of dragon fruit which are being grown. One has thorns and one has bracts. The classification of these genuses is under review at the moment, and recently it's proposed that they all be put in Selenicerius, though we're used to seeing them in the Hylocereus genus. I want to at this point actually acknowledge a mentor of mine, Joseph Mizrahi from Ben Gurion University, who introduced me to this crop way back in the 1980s. So from there, we know that there are a number of different types, and this is using the old classification system. The ones we normally see are the Hylocereus, undatus, but there are other types, particularly the yellow type. The flesh color is different. Some of them are interdeployed hybrids, and so it's actually somewhat mixed up, and you're easier off just to use a genus name than to use anything else. Now, the future for dragon fruit is predicated upon wholesaler and retailer needs, and there have been issues, particularly from the large producers in Indonesia, for consistency in supply and consistency in quality from shipment to shipment. There's also an increasing interest in safety, and of course, price is always an issue. What I wanted to deal with today are two aspects, one in which is production, and the other is post-harvest handling. So let's move forward from there. So we talk about production. There are a number of changes taking place in this area, particularly in Vietnam, but also in other places. In this particular picture, you see, in fact, the traditional form of some sort of concrete or wooden post with a tire or some sort of top on it, with the plant growing up the post and then growing out and hanging down on all sides. However, in this particular situation, it's only those stems on the outside which actually bear fruit. And it's very difficult to remove the cladodes, the stems on the inside of that post, and they're essentially not doing anything. They're not contributing to production. They're actually causing a site for new disease and to take place. And so the effort has been that they are those cladodes or those stems inside that clump are in fact using water, and they're using fertilizer, and yet you're not getting any fruit from them. And so that's an issue that's been addressed, particularly in Vietnam. And the object is to go to something like a T-bar trellis system. And the T-bar was found to be better than a single wire system for this. In this case, the cladodes or the stems are actually parallel to each other. It's readily easy to go through and prune and remove the cladodes which are not bearing fruit. And so you have an open canopy which gives you the ability to have good spray coverage. It also is much easier to harvest because the fruit is all in a row as you go down. This is from a colleague of mine in Vietnam who's also on this project. The other thing that's going on in Vietnam and some other places, also here in Hawaii, is the use of night lights. I wouldn't recommend you go into some of these places in Vietnam because there are naked wires with 400 volts or more on them running through the fields. Anyway, so essentially what they're doing is giving it a night break, which induces flowering in off-season. And so this is important to have a continuity of supply of fruit for your market. This is being seen more and more. Now, there are, in fact, the other situation that happens is that the practice is to get more uniform fruit size and larger fruit size is to prune. And so you see in this situation where this stem or this cladode has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fruit on it. Well, what would happen is only one of those would be allowed. The rest would be pruned off at a very early stage. So this leaves you with a sufficient area of leaf or of stem to give you photosynthesis, which will allow for full fruit development. The other thing that happens is that, particularly in Vietnam, where a lot of this is growing in the Mekong Delta, which is hot, humid, and rather rainy, they tend to remove after anthesis or after pollination, they'll pull off the petals and they'll be littered around the floor. And you can see that on this right-hand side picture. And the object there is to avoid pathogens or disease organisms getting into the flower and leading to fruit rot. Now, in post-harvest, there are a number of major issues, most of which have to do with handling and packing issues. A particular problem with that is, in fact, mechanical injury and dehydration. Dehydration being the loss of water, wrinkling, and the loss of overall appearance, particularly of the bracts on the outside of the fruit. This is some fruit in a European market. This is from Vietnam. And you can see these fruit here look pretty beat up. They have mechanical injury, but they particularly have dehydration. And this leads to a loss in skin gloss, and it leads to a shriveling, not a very pleasant appearance. The case here of the yellow dragon fruit is that, in fact, you can see the injury caused where the spines have been brushed off. And this actually shows up quite clearly in the market. But this is not, the ones on the left, the red ones, are in fact, don't look very appealing because the bracts are in fact very, very dehydrated. So in Vietnam, practices for harvesting still involve the use of a dandan and bins at the end of it. And the picture on the right is actually from Colombia. And this is at a higher elevation, and they're growing the Selenicerius. And they're cut off with a pair of secateurs, and a brush is used to remove the spines in the field before they're taken into the packing shed. In Vietnam, there are a couple of issues. This is fruit in a pre-sorting area in the field, and you can see that there's stacks of fruit, which leads to potential for compression damage and mechanical injury. This is a truck on the right, and you can see that the large bins, bamboo baskets, are in fact rather deep, and if you're the fruit at the bottom, that's not a very pleasant situation. So there are issues here in how you actually move it from the field to the pre-sorting area to the main packing area. This is showing you actually just these bins. They were there for about an hour when we got there. And so this is not the best idea. The fact that you're using these baskets and you're leaving them directly exposed to sun, so you do get sunburn, you do get water evaporation, and the fruit start to dry out. The next is the middle slide is showing you pictures of packing, the packing sorting when it gets into the packing shed itself. This is a centralized packing shed. One of the things I want to point out is the lining in this bamboo basket, which is designed to prevent the fruit rubbing against the bamboo on the outside of the basket, is actually aligned with pig food bags, which I would not recommend it, but it's widely used in other types of bags, including fertilizer bags. There are different markets, and you need to take this into account when considering. The one on the left-hand side is for a local market. The one on the right-hand side is designed for a more distant market. And we'll see two different types. One where it's being shipped to the People's Republic of China, another where it's being shipped to Japan, but it highlights differences in the way in which fruit is handled to avoid mechanical injury and avoid water loss. So most of them are in fact washed to some extent before they go through the packing area. And so in this case, the bin is the small bin from the pre-sort area is now tipped into a water bath, and then they're elevated out and moved through a drying rack. And then they'd normally, in this particular plant, each fruit is put into a small plastic bag. Now the problem here is that this particular company, and this fruit is destined for the People's Republic of China, they have a requirement to put a fixed amount of fruit in the carton. So the Chinese have told them, you need to have this weight in this carton. And so though the girls make every effort to get it in, you can see that in fact, the cartons can't be completely closed, yet they'll stack more boxes on top of it. And that means that there are some fruit which are being compressed and bruised in that set. The percentage could be upwards of 5 to 10% of the fruit. Again, have suffered mechanical injury due to compression injury and bruising in this process. At the other extreme is marketing for Japan. And here again, the fruit is washed, brought out in these rather shallow trays, and then inspected. So they're individually inspected, and whereas in the previous situation, the lady had them put into the plastic bag and then pushed them in as well as she could, but didn't have the degree of inspection that takes place here. And you'll see that the basket only has a single layer of fruit. Sometimes you'll see a few fruit on top. The cartons, on the other hand, are in fact also smaller in this case and not as deep. So you only have a single layer of fruit. Yes, you've got more cartons, and that's an added cost. But in fact, what you're doing is avoiding that overpacking, which you saw in the previous slide. But this is because the Japanese market has very particular requirements for fruit which is undamaged, whereas apparently the mainland Chinese are willing to accept slightly damaged fruit. This will show you fruit destined for the local market in Vietnam. And this is two different markets that it was going to. This would be the wholesale type of market, but these would be upper class supermarkets in Vietnam. We have been looking actually at the use of drones, and this is on the North Shore of Oahu. And you can see that in fact you can see diseased plants and pick them out. This was actually part of a project associated with an adjoining field, but I had the pilot fly the dragon fruit area with the grower's permission. And you can see that in fact, you can see the bagged fruit from the air in this particular thing. The flight is from 200 meters. I'm sorry, 200 feet. So that's all I have for today. I want to acknowledge Nancy Chen, Kana Marai, and Gail Aruhu, who has helped me throughout this year. This is Kana Marai here and Gail, who are borrowing some fruit from Dole, who have been another supporter in our research. And this work is being supported by USDA and a hatch project to myself. Thank you very much.